This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson, and it's my pleasure to have with us tonight Dr. Nakayama. Welcome, Dr. Nakayama.
Thanks, Joe.
We had a conversation actually recently last week about different kinds of issues, and welcome back tonight. Maybe we can continue our conversation.
And,
Glad to be here. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here, and one of your many accolades have come your way with great work. You're the chief of surgery at Mercer University and professor of surgery there. Is that correct?
Right. I'm chair of the Department of Surgery at Mercer and program director of the training program General Surgery at the Medical Center.
And you have under your tutelage a number of surgery residents. How many are there altogether?
Right. We have 20.
20. Wow.
And they spend 5 years with us. Each there's 4 trainees at every year, and they spend 5 years with us total in training in general surgery.
And you're sort of their surrogate father in a way, are you not? I mean, you have that sense of parental responsibility.
I've got responsibility. I don't think it's as profound as being a father, but I do have the responsibility for their education and training.
And that's rather a taxing issue. I mean, how do they go through their training? What are the leaps or the hurdles that a young woman or man has to go through to become a surgeon?
Well, what happens is that they go through undergraduate school and they apply for medical school, and they spend 4 years in medical school. And in medical school, they just learn the basics. They just learn the real rudimentary stuff of what medical science is, what drugs are, what anatomy is, and it's very, very basic. Then they start getting an introduction to all the different specialties, and based on their experience in medical school, they make a selection of what they want to specialize in. And they apply to us for training, additional training, and
Yes.
in my example, it's general surgery. That's surgery on the alimentary tract, the GI tract, the abdomen, like the liver, the biliary tract, trauma,
Yes.
surgical oncology, cancer surgery, endocrine surgery such as thyroid, parathyroid, and a whole variety of other areas, including surgical critical care, pediatric surgery, and some basics as far as gynecological and urological surgery. And so what they learn in 5 years with us is how to be a general surgeon in practice, licensed to serve. And our goal is to have general surgeons for the state of Georgia.
Yes, and is there some particular attention to rural areas in Georgia, or do you have any?
Like Mercer University, who has as part of its mission training physicians for central and southern Georgia, particularly those in rural and underserved areas.
Yes.
The residency in general surgery also has a commitment to provide surgeons, practicing
Yes.
general surgeons, for the same areas, and it has the same commitment for rural surgery.
And so that's a lot of daunting task, may I say. And you, I think you recently graduated some young men and women. Is that right? What are they? Which direction are they going in life?
Well, what happens is that the mega trend in surgical training is that nearly every chief resident, in other words, a resident who has spent 5 years in training in general surgery, chooses to get additional training in some
Yes.
area. And so we've got 2 who have decided to go into surgical critical care, 1 who has gone into for additional training in minimally invasive surgery,
Yes.
and 1 that's decided to go on to pediatric surgery. And so as a result, they moved away from general surgery, although the surgeon who's taking additional training in minimally invasive surgery likely will be doing general surgery. The rest of them will be specializing.
And it's a pretty tough journey, as I think the public might understand, about how the doctors put their shingles up and I guess the ordeal they've been through in many ways. But they have to take a lot of tests, and how does that work? I mean, they have exams national exams when they go along. How does one get their boards in surgery?
At the very end of 5 years of training, they have to take a qualifying examination, which is a written examination with the American Board of Surgery. And if they pass that, then they have to take a certifying examination, which is an oral examination for the American Board of Surgery. In addition, they have to be licensed by the American Board of Medical Examiners.
Yes.
That happens during training. But also they have to have board certification in any specialty that they want, and that involves additional testing and training. So as a result, in preparation for all that, the 5 years are devoted toward those sorts of examinations, making sure that our trainees get the operative experience with patient care, and the book learning, to put it in its most basic level, the book learning necessary to support their practices.
Yes. Now, one of the issues that's, we talked about that briefly as we spoke last week, about some of the issues about the change in the American healthcare system, some of the things going on. And one of the issues that at least we can hear something about are doctor shortages, issues about appropriate supply-demand dynamics with physicians. How does the public, how can they rest assured the system is producing the correct number of surgeons? How do we do that?
There is tremendous concern that we're not producing enough doctors, and specifically enough general surgeons. The problem is that throughout, ever since you and I were in training back in the 70s and 80s, there are spots for 1,000 general surgery residents a year.
Yes.
30 years later, okay, some 25, 30 years later, there's still only 1,000 spots. And so even though the population has increased probably from 180 million during that time to 240 million during that time, or even 260 million at that time, an increase of probably about 30%. The number of general surgeons being produced has not changed. And why that is because, first of all, it's very daunting. I think of all the specialties, surgery, general surgery, and neurological surgery.
I'm glad you included that, yes.
are probably the most demanding as far as length and rigor.
Yes.
The second thing is that it's supply and demand relationships means that those specialties that command the highest salaries are probably going to attract the most attention.
Yes.
And so as a result, that means radiology, dermatology, and those sorts of specialties that are remunerative and aren't as demanding either in terms of training or in terms of practice.
Yes.
They don't have as much night call. They don't have as much emergency care. Those are going to attract more interest among medical students and residents. And so as a result, the incentives are skewed away from general surgery. And so there's a great deal of concern that for a variety of economic and professional training reasons, we're not training nearly enough general surgeons as we need.
Now, isn't there something, I mean, when we look at doctor shortage issues, we've had some increase in the number of students that matriculate in medical schools, in American medical schools. We're getting more, but the real choke appears to be residency slots. I mean, those numbers are somewhat fixed, and they haven't gone up too much, isn't that just in general?
The numbers are fixed for a good reason, and the numbers are fixed insofar there's only so many resources for training that are available. You need to have hospitals that do a high volume of general surgery. You need to have faculty who are experienced in training residents and who can educate educate learners in a very demanding field. And you have to pay these kids for their work. And they're doing work.
Now, in my day, I think I did it for free, but almost. Is that right? I mean, so the wages are up a little bit.
But right now, the hospitals themselves have got to pay the residents for their work, and legitimately so. And so as a result, where does that money come from? And the money comes from, in part, from training grants from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services and others of federal government.
Yes.
But those monies are decreasing at the same time that the demand for more trainees is increasing. That's one factor. The second factor is that the pipeline is so long. In order to have more trainees in general surgery for the immediate for the immediate term, it's a zero-sum game. In other words, if we're going to have more general surgeons, then we have fewer of other specialties. If you want to have more trainees, then you have to admit more medical students. You have to admit more medical students because of pressing needs in all fields, because there's a general physician shortage. And that takes 4 years for those medical students to go through medical school. And it's 5 years for general surgery, 4 years for orthopedics, 5 years for neurological surgery. And there are
I thought it was 10. I mean, that's a joke. It seemed like however many years. It seemed like 10, yes.
But there are other specialties in which they can go out into practice
Yes.
in less time, like internal medicine, 3 years, pediatrics, 3 years.
Yes.
So there's a whole variety of reasons, all of which are impacting on the physicians.
So one of the things going on, I mean, just to sort of cut to the chase on the situation, we have this almost a frozen residency number in our country, and one of the reasons for that is that the government gives money through Medicare, as you mentioned,
right.
And this number has been somewhat frozen for a number of years, and the medical education is quite expensive. So one of the things that's a little bit disconcerting is that with our tremendous doctor need and doctor shortage that's looming, and this huge, extraordinary problem we have with expensive health care, not enough money to pay for health care, there's the money going into medical education is pretty much frozen. The residency caps are close to being frozen, and that's causing some dislocation in resource allocation. I mean, is that a fair statement, or are you any comments about that?
I think it's totally fair, and I think it's a credit to the medical center that they have been very forthright in supporting medical education, particularly at the graduate medical education level and others at the resident training level. They've given us resources to expand our surgery residency from 2 per year,
Yes.
in other words, eight trainees total, or 10 trainees total,
Yes.
to 4 per year, and that's something that they did so willingly. They were compensated for sure by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, but even in the face of declining compensation, they've still maintained their commitment. And as a matter of fact, they've committed to increased slots in terms of medical education slots.
Well, I'm happy to hear this has happened. I suspect your considerable charm played a role in extracting these shekels to get that accomplished, but it's very hard to bounce the basketball many times in medical education and
Right.
getting sufficient funds. And now, it would appear to me that it would be a good trade-off in regards to the public, that right now we have healthcare dollars for medical education are very slim. There's an extraordinary increase in healthcare expenses. Maybe during the training period for young doctors, that they learn something about being a good, wise custodians of these healthcare dollars. They learn something about economics, how to make the system work more efficiently. And it would, if that were the case, it would be reasonable for more money to be put into medical education. Just for many reasons that might happen, but it's a good, just from the pure economic scale of things, that would be useful. Do you have any comments about that? And are the young residents learning about some of these health economic issues that are going to impact things?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
much?
I think that they can help not be impacted or not see what's going on. And I think the responsible education that we can give them is not by bewailing the fate of medicine in the future, not by saying that there's not enough money, that things are going to change irreversibly for the worse, but instead train these young surgeons, okay, and
Yes.
young physicians, that there are ways to extract value out of the system,
Yes.
that to eliminate waste, to make sure that quality is high. And what are the operational ways to do that, and what is the responsible way to do that within organizations? And that is that's on top of learning how to do appendectomies.
Yes, yes.
And so as a result,
Which is not altogether an easy thing, is it? You can certainly
So,
make a mistake.
On the one hand, you have to take care of sick patients, save lives, and learn how to do operations. On the other hand, you have to teach residents and young surgeons how to be a wise steward of resources. Okay?
Yes.
How to make sure that you don't order unnecessary tests. If something goes wrong, how do you correct that? How do you make sure it doesn't happen again? How do you act proactively to increase
Yes.
and enhance quality? And those are, at the end of the day, is the harder thing, because those things are not necessary in books. You have to practice that.
Yes.
And that's where role modeling is so important. It's important to be the responsible
Yes,
surgeon.
yes.
Part of the responsible surgeon is getting up and doing the appendectomy at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
At the same time, it's going to meetings, making sure that medical quality is front and center, but also that resources are not wasted.
Well, that's certainly a substantial problem, and as we consider the changes coming down the road in healthcare, I mean, Do you want to prophesy what the situation will be like in 10 years, or dare you do that? Do you have any?
Well, you know, after all that optimism, you have to recognize there's going to be more patients.
Why are we going to have more patients?
Because more patients are going to be covered. I think they're going to be just the plain population is going to increase. For example, when we were growing up, the population in the U.S. was probably 180 million. Now it's 260 million, 280 million.
It's a big number. Yes.
It's huge. And so there's more patients. I think that there's going to be fewer surgeons to take care of them because the surgeons are retiring. There's going to be the surgeons who are used to long hours at compensation that most surgeons will not be willing to work for is going to be retiring or aging out. And the surgeons who are going to be replacing them are going to be looking for alternative kind of practice models where they have limited time working, that they have free time for themselves. It's just a different generation.
So more patients, and what else?
More patients, limited surgeons, and less money in the system. And so those three characteristics are going to characterize medicine and surgery in the future. So how do you deal with that? And that's the challenge that we're going to face.
Yes. Well, it's a complicated story here, and we could say back and forth about what we've had a conversation about this earlier about healthcare investment. Right. So one of the things we hear conversations about the 1/6 of the nation's GNP going into healthcare, whatever the number is, and the return that occurs from that, and we could have that. Maybe we can just bat that tennis ball back and forth.
Okay.
But would it be wiser to spend even more money on healthcare if it were spent efficiently? If we had extra dollars, what would we do with it? Could we really get some bang for the buck? Could we give people another decade of life, more cancer research, better seat belts? What would be a good investment?
I think the U.S. in the debate about healthcare, what's not being emphasized is that the quality of life and the lives and the years of quality living has been enhanced to an extraordinary degree.
That's a big deal,
science.
isn't it?
It's huge because what you have is a productive workforce. You preserve a productive workforce. You have productive elderly or older citizens.
Yes.
Who are living, who are citizens, who work a lot of times, who have productive relationships in their community and with their families, and that has a price, but also it's a benefit. And I think that we have to remember that back when we were training, heart disease killed hundreds of thousands of people a year.
Yes,
it was a leading killer, and it was unusual to see men over the age of 65. Now it's extraordinary how many 60s and 70 and 80-year-old men you see that are in good health.
Yes.
And that's directly as a result of our healthcare system. That's a result of the revolution in medical science. That's the result of improvements in healthcare. And it's a benefit that our society has said it's worth it.
Yes,
and so
yes.
I would say that rather than saying that we're spending too much on healthcare, I say it's an appropriate amount on healthcare because
Yes.
it's a decision that we've made out of a productive, very successful society, and we say this is important to us that we have a healthy citizenry, and
Yes.
I think that's the benefit. Now there are limits, of course. Okay,
Yes.
we can't keep on borrowing money from the Chinese and from our foreign
Yes.
creditors forever, and that's where being the steward of our resources comes in. At some point, we've got to say, okay, we've got limited resources, as we always have.
Yes.
And we've got to make sure that the quality is maintained at the same time that we moderate cost.
Well, it's an interesting decade coming up, or in the future, as to how we do that. We can hope that physicians play a role in this, and we can hope we can reach politicians, since they're the people that seem to be driving the bus. And do we do that? I mean, are we getting enough as a physician? Do you think you get enough interchange to get your viewpoints across, since this is your life work? You obviously very dedicated to what happens. Are we getting our story out there?
I think a relationship with politicians is crucial. I think that surgeons and medical people in general, but particularly in our field, have to get our viewpoints across. I think that one of the things that makes the trial lawyers so successful is because they have a voice. They have a voice in government. and they contribute to their political action committee,
Yes,
their
yes,
PAC.
yes.
While surgeons have a PAC. And
Yes.
if every surgeon in the country contributed $500 to their
Right,
PAC,
right.
we would be a larger PAC than the trial unit.
Yes, yes.
Than the trial lawyers with a PAC,
Right,
PAC
right.
would be. And that translates into political influence.
Yes.
The advantage that surgeons have is that at every point, surgeons have been in the forefront of quality care. They've been in the forefront
Yes.
of the quality movement. They've been in the forefront of cancer care. The the forerunner of the Commission on Cancer was American College of Surgeons
Yes.
organization. The Joint Commission, the regulatory commission that regulates hospital
Yes.
quality, came out of American College of
Yes,
Surgeons
yes.
surgeons effort. We've always been about quality. We've always been about patients.
Yes.
And quality is job one. Okay.
Yes.
What we do for physicians is to enhance quality, and it all has to do with the patient, and that's where everything intersects.
Well, we're going to have an interesting time in the future. One of the things that concerns me is the idea that if the system is going to be so centralized with the idea of trying to save money, that the decisions are going to be these ukasi, which is an old Russian word. Some people say ukasi, some people say ukasi. My Russian friends tell me it's ukasi. And that's just a law that the Tsar propagated in ancient Russia. You just say, this is it. This word has come from Moscow. So we have to, that as a concern, I think, that people have. The traditional doctor-patient relationships might be disturbed. And it's so difficult many times to pick the right decision for an individual patient because causality is so complicated. There's so many factors that go on. And if we have arbitrary, capricious enforcement regulations put in place, then I think it's going to enormously distract from quality care.
Oh, absolutely.
And we need to be able to respond to that.
Well, one of the values that we have, and one of the tenets of professionalism that I think is basic to American medicine, okay, the kind of medicine that we practice in the U.S., is patient-centered care. Okay, it's all about the patient.
Yes.
And the patient decides what is appropriate for him or her based on what the medical needs are, based on our communication with the patient. Okay, their understanding of where they are in their lives, if it's
Yes.
appropriate to forego care, or is it appropriate to go all out and try to cure
Yes.
the cancer, for example, and where they are as far as their community, where they are as far as their culture, what's appropriate, and it's patient-centered care. It's family patient-centered care, and to say that there's going to be a committee in Washington, for example,
Yes.
making those sorts of decisions is completely antithetical to that.
Yes.
It is. It's not American.
Yes.
Okay, because
Yes.
Americans really depend on individual decisions.
Yes.
We talked last week about education, engineering, and enforcement.
Yes.
And the American way is education. Okay?
Yes.
Anything about engineering and enforcement is not our way.
Yes.
And so it doubles, or even triples, or multiplies our responsibility for education, not only to our learners that we
Yes.
deal with on an everyday basis, but also our patients, because it's one of the failings of our educational system that patients don't have the background as far as health to make the right
Yes.
decisions, because it's lifelong decisions. It starts from their upbringing.
Right.
Okay. It starts on decisions whether or not to take that first
Yes.
puff of smoke, or whether or not to go on that bender.
Yes.
And it's all about education. It's not indoctrination. It's making sure that they can make those decisions that's for their own benefit.
Well, it's quite a world out there. One of the things that we could say, well, maybe these committees might try and do something in Washington. That's an issue to at least have an interchange about. Another thing that might happen, you've mentioned, I think, quite eloquently, the idea of teamwork is a very important part of healthcare apparatus. And it's very difficult as a practicing surgeon or neurosurgeon to do things without everyone else's help. The right word is impossible. But if we depend on the financial health of our institution we practice in.
Absolutely.
So if the government were to say we're going to stop funding Medicare or Medicaid, or the money substantially diminished, it would be difficult to maintain the present quality apparatus without a lot of. If it were done capriciously in an arbitrary fashion, it would be difficult to adjust to that.
Well,
and that's a big challenge, isn't it?
Saying that, economics is all about dealing with limitations of resources. And so that's why physicians have a real responsibility to be leaders in this, okay? Because the physicians have got to be the people who drive decisions, because we are the ones who know what quality is and what goes into quality.
Yes.
You know, it's value is quality over cost.
Yes.
And we know at what point we can cut costs and still maintain quality. We know what is wasteful. We can see what is wasteful. We can make decisions as
Yes.
to how we can be more efficient. And at the same time, we have our eye on the ball. We have measured quality. That's why these quality measures are so important. And following the correct quality measure is the most important task. What do we follow? What sort of quality
Yes.
measures? And just longevity, I think, is too gross a measure. It's got to be something, you know, that's specific to a patient, to a condition, and under a given situation.
You mentioned the physician's role in cost and efficiency. Isn't one of the problems in trying to do that a practicing physician has almost no idea about what anything costs? If you're in the OR, what does a sponge cost? What does 10 extra minutes there cost? It's the knowledge of expenses are really not in our purview.
No.
And I think one of the things that's pretty revolutionary at the Cleveland Clinic, which is, they're really an extraordinary place in trying to make the American healthcare system more efficient. And I'm told that everything has a price on it. So if you're in the OR and you pick up a sponge, it says $5 or whatever it costs. Not that there's any pressure particularly.
Right.
Not to use it, but you're at least aware of these issues.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that at the end of the day, patients have to be aware of the cost too.
Yes.
Because what happens if the patients are insulated from cost by having care provided free,
Yes.
or by having a copay that only covers 5% of the total cost of care.
Yes.
They overconsume, and that's as basic as it was when Adam Smith first wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. And somehow we have to humanely get that price information to patients so that they can make reasoned decisions. They can see that bad health decisions are going to ultimately be more
Yes.
expensive than making small, modest health choices when they're healthy and then they can make good decisions as far as their own health.
Yeah, allegedly, one of the things we can praise the Swiss for, besides their cheese and whatever their clocks, is they've got some good ideas on healthcare. And I think one of them is that when you get an insurance policy, health insurance policy, they've got lots of they have healthcare exchanges. They've got lots of interesting ideas. But one of them is that you have a 5-year policy. So that your health insurance policy runs for 5 years, and there's an annual examination that the patient comes in and the blood pressure is checked, and if they've gotten a little pudgy over the past few years, that has an impact on their insurance rates. So there's an incentive to if you have a very unhealthy life and you're going to put yourself at risk, it's going to impose some financial distress on the system. Well, you may have to pay a little more. So you have some individual responsibility, and that's we're getting near the end of our time. But do you want to comment about that and make any remarks you'd like as we close down?
Well, like the old Chinese saying, "May you live in interesting times." These are very interesting times for health economics. I think that not to recognize physicians' responsibility and understanding of health economics and how the business is run is really selling your patients short. You have to have a good, intimate understanding of the business of medicine in order to practice it well.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nakayama. I think you're a great role model for the young doctors under your tutelage.
Glad you think so.
We'll have to have you back again, and I think you've been a very informative guest, and so thank you so much.
All right.
We've been glad to
Sam,
talk to you tonight.
always
Thank
a
you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national and international basis.